Welcome to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. We introduce you to the voices of community thought leaders and changemakers who are working on solutions that face our fellow individual community members, neighborhoods, cities, and our region. This is George Koster, your host. This episode is part of a series of interviews we conducted through our participation in the Bay Area Video Coalition's TV show titled San Francisco Nonprofits Spotlight. The interviews were conducted via Zoom from April to June 2020 during the height of the first phase of the COVID-19 pandemic and the shelter-in-place requirements. The goal of the series is to shine a spotlight on the nonprofits and their staff who are struggling to deal with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their operations, services, and sustainability. The series of interviews we conducted feature voices from a cross-section of organizations that make up the fabric of our community. Each of them brings a unique perspective on how they and we are dealing with the issues facing our community during the pandemic.
There was a woman at Twitter, a Latinx woman, who wanted to have a Latinx tech night for people who are in the tech world. And so she rallied all her friends and her family, and they came and we did a talk back after the show with them. And it was just amazing. People were speaking from their hearts and talking about their own personal experiences with immigration and talking with the cast. And it was just really a moment, one of those moments in theater that you never want to forget.
In this episode, we feature the voices of Susan Harloe and JoAnne Winter, co-artistic directors, along with Amy Prosser, the Youth Arts Program Coordinator of Word for Word Performing Arts Company. Over the past 25 plus years, Word for Word has theatrically transcribed and performed over 70 stories by some of the world's best writers. Word for Word brings short stories to life with both exciting visuals and innovative staging, and they do all this without altering the author's voice, including keeping every he said and she said intact. In addition to Word for Word's live theater performance program, they created an arts education program known as Youth Arts. The Youth Arts program utilizes the Word for Word style of in-depth literature from the Inside Out workshops in San Francisco Bay Area schools. I'm joined remotely via Zoom by Susan Harloe and JoAnne Winter, co-artistic directors, along with Amy Prosser, the Youth Arts Program Coordinator for Word Performing Arts Company. Thanks for being here, Susan, JoAnne, and Amy. Given our remote sequestering, I wanted to start with giving the audience a little background on Word for Word and your relationship with Z-Space. So, JoAnne, can you share with the audience what that's like?
So Word for Word Performing Arts Company is a professional theater company based in San Francisco, and we are unique in that we take short stories and theatricalize them. We use short stories as a text instead of a play script, and we don't change the text at all. We keep all of the narrative of and the he says and she says, but all of that is fully theatricalized. And for instance, you might have somebody say, she peered tentatively into her computer camera during the Zoom call or something like that. So the actors speak the narrative as they're doing it. It's like the characters are talking about it as it's happening to them. And it's the most difficult thing to describe because everybody thinks you're script in hand with music stands, but it's actually quite active. That's the whole challenge of it, is to make the story come alive theatrically. And it's quite exciting. It gives a richness to the experience because you have the story interpreted by the writer through the writer's language, and then also interpreted by the director and the actors and the designers. And we are a program of Z-Space, which is a developmental laboratory for New American theater. And we joined the Z-Space at its beginning 7, 8 years ago. And Sue and I were artists in residence. Z-Space was started by David Dower as an offshoot of the Z Collective, which was a theater company at the time. And his idea was to give theater artists a place and time and funding to just explore theatrical ideas that they had without the onus of production. So you didn't have to say, in 5 weeks, I have to put this on a stage. You could explore and make mistakes and discover and then take it to production if you wanted to. Or maybe you decide, no, this isn't a good idea. And so there were a group of theater artists that would meet weekly and show each other these explorations. And Sue and I, at this same time, had been talking about starting Word for Word in San Francisco. Sue had been part of a company in Seattle called Book It, which did the same thing at the time. Now they have gone on to adapt full-length novels. But she decided to move back from Seattle to San Francisco. And I said, hey, could we try something like that here? So we approached David. We said, we have this idea to create this literature-based theater company. And we did. And we put a story up, Dorothy Parker's The Standard of Living, and showed it to our compatriots at Z-Space and said, hey, anybody interested in being a part of this? And that's where our core company, the charter group, came from primarily. A few people joined a few years later, but that core company has been meeting every month or practically every month for the last 27 years and deciding what direction the company will go in. And we've done, oh gosh, what do you say, Sue? Over 150 productions, main stage and smaller ones. And we toured all over California and the Western United States. And we've been very fortunate to be able to tour to France for the last over 20 years. And we've worked with many authors. We've had many authors come and see our productions of their work. That's been one of the most thrilling parts of what we do. And we also have an arts education program where we take students through this process of taking a short story or a poem and theatricalizing it. And it's turned out to be a wonderful amalgam of literature, arts, and theater arts. And kids really get viscerally what it is to read. What are the skills that good readers need to visualize and to really break that text down? So we've got a lot of richness within what we do. And Z-Space at the same time is developing all kinds of new works all the time. And Z-Space is also a place. It's a theater in Project Artaud in the Mission in San Francisco. And in addition to our productions and other productions that Z-Space develops and produces, we rent this space out and bring all kinds of diverse theatrical companies from all over the world and all over the country, and dance troupes, musical groups. So we have a very rich life amongst Z-Space.
Thank you. So Susan, can you talk about how COVID-19 has impacted the production of Word for Word?
Well, the first thing that happened was we had this fantastic tour of France planned. As JoAnne mentioned, we go every year. We have special funding that we receive, whose purpose is French-American amity through cultural events. So we were going to bring Retablos, the short chapters from Octavio Solis's memoir, Life Lived Along the Border. This had been in production at Z-Space, and we had to, close the show just 4 performances before it was due to be over. So we were fortunate that we got to have most of the run. But B, we were supposed to bring this show to France, and we were so excited about this. And some of the cast had never been to Europe, some had been, but everybody everywhere was pretty thrilled about this. And that was one of the hardest, I think probably the hardest thing in my career, was when I had to go to the cast. And that was on March 8th, actually, because it wasn't looking good. Italy had just been quarantined, the northern part of Italy. And I had spoken to friends in France, and they said, well, you could come, but I don't know if you could get out. And so I had to go and talk to the cast about this. And, I wept. It was really, really difficult. But I said, we are not canceling this. We're postponing this because the show is built to tour. And it's all there, packed in bags, costumes cleaned, everything there, ready to go when we are able to go again. So that was one thing. The second was that we had a show planned, and a bunch of our off-the-page staged readings also planned for this summer. And the show this fall was Jeffrey Eugenides' The Complainers, which is an incredible story of the power of elder womanhood, I'd say. And that was supposed to be performed in September, October, and we're postponing that. And of course, the question is, that's next up for us. And we're talking about it and talking to designers about it and to our director about it and to the potential actors about it, but we just don't know exactly when. So for us, it's those specific projects. And then, of course, the whole entire future and how we're going to perform. And we have 2 spaces. At Z-Space, we have a black box, that what we call Z below, and then the space above, which is much larger and more airy. and you could do some social distancing there. So the Z team has been talking a lot. Our technical guys and staff are talking a lot about how we can make that work for us, when we can make that work for us.
So, Susan and JoAnne, over the 20 plus years, what do you feel like has been the largest impact of Word for Word on our community?
Well, I think it's the stories that we pick, because we're performing short stories, it's a little bit different than a play. And so it's an unusual form, and people become captivated by it, and they get excited about it. So it also leads people to read the books themselves or to look for other work by that writer. And there's a whole literacy component to it just by the very nature of it being short stories that we perform. We select our stories carefully, and there's lots of criteria for that. But one of them is the impact it will have on the community and whose story is being told. So I would speak first to what we just closed, the story that I mentioned, Retablos, Stories from a Life Lived Along the Border. Octavio Solis, who's a renowned playwright and who also coincidentally directed some of our very early stories, grew up in El Paso. And so this is his memoir. And we took 14 of the chapters in his memoir and put them on the stage with a wonderful cast. And we were really lucky. There was a woman at Twitter, a Latinx woman, who wanted to have a Latinx tech night for people who were in the tech world. And so she rallied all her friends and her family, and they came, and we did a talk back after the show with them. And it was just amazing. People were speaking from their hearts and talking about their own personal experiences with immigration and talking with the cast. And it was just really a moment, one of those moments in theater that you never want to forget, because it was so heartfelt and people were speaking so openly, and it showed you the power of theater to be able to tell stories on stage that other people can relate to and talk about. So that's the first that I would mention. And then JoAnne?
Well, last year we did a production of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is not a short story, but an epic poem, as everybody probably knows. But one of our core members, Delia McDougall, had for many, many years wanted to bring this to the stage. And we always conceived of it as an epic production to match the epic nature of the poetry, because it is about a sea voyage. And it took us many, many years to be able to put the money together to do that and the right set of artists. And last year we were able to make that happen thanks to help from a lot of people. Delia McDougall directed the production, and she saw the poem through the lens of the climate crisis. There's a lot of connection there if you look at it. It's about, man trying to have control over nature and failing dismally. So we were able to not only have this amazingly beautiful production with an incredible cast and just beautifully designed, but we also took our lobby at Z Space, which is quite large, and we did a lot of informational displays about the climate crisis and what people could do to help with that. And it was beautifully designed by one of our volunteers, Amy Hosa. She put in her heart and soul to that. So that was a really exciting thing that, again, our goal to have an impact on the community, to not only move them with a theatrical production, but to have them go away with some things to think about and to possibly do.
And the other director of that was Jim Cave. Delia and Jim Cave directed it together. So he was able to bring a lot of technical aspects to it too. I would mention two stories real quick. One is Sonny's Blues by James Baldwin that we performed in collaboration with the Lorraine Hansberry Theater. And that was directed by Margot Hall with a great cast. Incredible story by James Baldwin. Then we also were able to do, by local favorite Amy Tan, we were able to have a production of Immortal Heart. And that too was reaching a community. I remember at one point we had a blessing by a master calligrapher artist, and we were really able to bring people together for those two stories as well. And I just want to give one shout out to Tobias Wolff, because of all the writers, we've done more of his stories than anybody's. And I think it was in our early years when we realized the power of the short story and how exciting it can be for people through his work. So we could go on and on, but I think those are, JoAnne, you have.
Well, I mean, every writer that we've chosen, there's some sort of story about the connection that we've made there. One of the early stories that Octavio Solis directed was a story by Greg Saris called Slaughterhouse, from his book Grand Avenue, which is about marginalized people present day in Sonoma County and Santa Rosa. And when we did that production, we invited Greg to come, and he came to see the show, and we sort of fell in love with each other. And we've had this relationship pretty much throughout the entire existence of Word for Word. And Greg, in addition to being a wonderful author, is the tribal chairman of the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria, which are the Coast Miwok and Southern Pomo people of Sonoma County. Greg, a few years ago, took some Miwok and Pomo legends and kind of rewrote them and made a collection called How a Mountain Was Made. And we've taken a couple of stories from that and staged them for family performance for children and their families. We've toured it a little bit. That inspired Greg to invite us to come up and be part of their summer camp for Native youth, because they didn't have a lot of arts programming. So for the last 3 years, this will be our third summer, we have been participating and bringing theater and arts programming to the summer camps for the Native youth up in Sonoma County. Now, of course, this summer, we're having to go virtual with it. And Amy Prosser, who is our youth arts coordinator, youth arts being our arts education program, has been just on the massive learning curve of how to bring this onto Zoom. And Amy, why don't you tell us about that?
So I just wanted to start by saying that when the shelter in place came down, we were between residencies, between school residencies. So we had this really nice lull time where we could really check in with our teaching artists, all of whom are gig workers who go from teaching job to acting job and were deeply, deeply affected by COVID. So we were able to spend about a month checking in with them, checking in with our grant organizations to make sure that we could continue paying our teaching artists, even if they weren't able to teach in the schools. We had to cancel one of our school residencies. So that was really lovely to have that time to focus on them. But as JoAnne said, we're now moving 6 weeks of summer camp online for the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria. It's going very well. We have 9 incredible teaching artists who are going to teach a 4th through 8th grade program, and then 9 other teaching artists who are going to teach a teen program. So yeah, we're learning everything we can about Zoom. We've shortened our day to 3 hours instead of 6 hours. And we've had to really alter our curriculum from putting on one of Greg's stories to teaching a variety of theater skills. And the last thing I'll say is that I just heard from Chairman Saris that he's working with the Smithsonian, and they are documenting how Native people are transitioning during this period from live education to virtual education. And Chairman Saris is very excited to use our camp as an example of that transition. So we're really honored to be part of that study and conversation.
I think finally, just to wrap up, how can people get engaged with Word for Word, support your efforts to keep live theater going in the Bay Area?
Well, you can go to our website, which is www.zspace.org, and there is a donate button, and all of that money will go to support the various artists, actors, directors, designers, teaching artists, dancers, and our hourly staff that is not able to work right now because we don't have any shows on. All of those people need support, and we would really appreciate anything anybody can help with right now. zspace.org.
And I want to thank all 3 of you for being a part of our show today, and we'll get the word out in the show on all the social media and how people can follow Word for Word and the youth program. Please stay safe and healthy out there as we go through this new and strange time.
Thank you, George.
George, you too.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
That's it for this episode of Voices of the Community. You've been listening to the voices of Susan Harloe and JoAnne Winter, co-artistic directors, along with Amy Prosser, the Youth Arts Program Coordinator of Word for Word Performing Arts Company. Susan mentioned working with author Tobias Wolff to bring his stories to life on stage. When asked why does Word for Word's method work, Tobias responded, quote, "What they're really trying to do is approximate the imaginative experience as someone reading a story and create those visual equivalents that the language produces in their imaginations as they read the story. Those little things that I would worry about, the little he said, she said, all that kind of little business that goes on in dialogue, they make that disappear." Unquote. We hope that you enjoyed the insights, points of view, and personal stories from the voices of changemakers and their nonprofits featured in the series. To find out more and get engaged with the nonprofit and staff members featured in this episode, please go to my website, georgecoster.com, and click on Voices of the Community to find links to this episode. Please consider a donation and volunteering to provide a hand up to your fellow community members. I want to thank my associate producer, Eric Estrada, as well as the wonderful team at Bay Area Video Coalition. Go to www.bavc.org to find out more about Bay Area Video Coalition services. To listen to our next episode in this series and to our archived past shows, which feature community voices working on solutions to critical issues facing Northern California communities, please go to georgecoster.com. While you're on our website, please consider making a donation to help us provide future shows just like this. Please rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and share the story with your friends. Follow us on Twitter @GeorgeCoster, and please email us at george@georgecoster.com. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and thank you for listening.